What's up everybody, welcome back. So it's been a few weeks since I released the CurvePlayer, but I haven't really been using it a lot on the videos, so I decided it's time I'm going to use it to make an animation, and I'm going to show you how I'm using it. So first of all, I'm going to create a lower animation with the CurvePlayer, and later I'm also going to set it up so our character can actually use it. So if you don't care much for me just messing around with animations, you can skip ahead in the timeline. I'll make sure to add chapters and you can skip ahead to the scripting part of this video. So let's start by creating a curve, and first of all I need new curves. So I'm going to right click, go to miscellaneous and add a curve. It's going to be a curve vector, and that's going to be my lower translation curve for the pistol. So that's a pistol, and then I'm also going to create one for the rotation, so lower rotation pistol, and I need to add these to the CurvePlayer. So first of all, let's go to the CurvePlayer folder, open the character and select the CurvePlayer child blueprint over here. Then on the right side you can add translation curves and rotation curves, so add one of each and select the lower curves, so lower translation and lower rotation. And now we are good to go. So let's launch the project, let's get a viewport up. There we go. So just load my previous settings. Yeah, that's fine. So we're going to work on the lower animation. So select the lower animation over here, and I'm going to get the curves up as well. So this is going to be a bit tedious because I need to do it on one monitor, and usually I'm using both of my monitors. So there's going to be a lot of switching around, but we're going to try and make it work. So the lower animation, let's start with the translation. So this needs to be a pretty fast lower animation for the pistol, so something about 0.4 seconds maybe. So first of all I'm just going to add a keyframe at 0 and at 0.4. So the middle mouse button to add keyframes quickly, and I'll make sure I'm able to select each graph, so something like this. So I want to move the gun down, obviously, so that's the -Z axis. So let's grab the Z key and let's move it down something about 12 units maybe. So let's make this curve fit on the screen, so that's a bit better. So now if I'm going to reload the translation curve, you can see it's 0.4 seconds. I'm going to assign the length to track 1, so it matches the length of my curve. And now I can simply see how this looks. So it's not lowering enough, and we also want to rotate it while we're lowering it. So let's add a bit of rotation and make sure that it goes down further. So let's get the curve for the translation first. So something about -18 maybe. And let's go to the rotation. So let's add a few keyframes at 0. So if I want to rotate the gun down, I need to rotate it on the x-axis, so that's the red one. So let's grab another keyframe at 0.4, and let's see what happens if we rotate it about 8 degrees maybe, so -8. And then I'll click the little cursor sign over here so it fits the curve on the screen. Now let's see how this looks. So I don't think we actually need to reload the rotation. We can, but it's mainly just for assigning the length, so the actual curve is applied to it. So you don't really need to reload it, but so we need to rotate it the other way. So let's change that first. So let's make this plus 12 degrees maybe. So we're going to rotate it a bit more as well. It doesn't really look like it's rotating. Let's see. So we can actually eject the pawn and see what happens. So let me get rid of the bones. Well, let me keep them here for a little bit. So it is actually rotating, but it's not enough. We want to add more rotation. And one thing to keep in mind, as you can see, we are actually animating the IK hand gun bone. So all of the rotation and movements are going to be around this bone and not around the center of the hands, like you might expect. So if you rotate it down, it will also move forward a little bit, so it will kind of tilt forward. So you have to keep that in mind. The movement is a little bit different because you aren't actually animating the hands. So let's see, we want to rotate it further. So let's just add a whole bunch. Let's make it 25 degrees, maybe 35, why not? And we want to rotate it faster as well, so I'm going to put it at the 0.2 mark. Now let's see. So that looks a bit better already. You can see the gun is pointing down while it's moving, so that's better. We're getting there. So I also want to rotate it a little bit to the left, like it's moving to the side a little bit. So then I want to rotate it on the Z axis as well. So let me get the blue graph over here. And I want to rotate it to the left, so that should be minus, but I could be mistaken. That won't be the first time. So let's put it at -6. Let's see what happens. Yeah, it's working a little bit, so let's add a bit more. So let's make it -12 degrees. Yeah, that's a bit better. So you can see that the point of the gun is moving a little bit to the left while it's rotating down. So we are getting there. So what else could we add? Let's make it move a little bit lower, so we're sure when we're switching weapons the mesh won't clip with the camera, so it's far out of our screen. So let's make it something about 24, and we have a bit of room. Now I'm also going to make sure that this is a bit of a smoother graph, so I'm going to select the cubic interpolation over here, the automatic tangents, and it will smooth out the graph. And I'm going to do the same for the rotation. So let's see. Well, that's kinda okay, I think. It's pretty fast, but it's a pistol, so that's not too bad. So I think I can live with it, so I'm just gonna keep it like this, and that's how I'm using the CurvePlayer basically. So this isn't a really long animation, but you can make other animations like walking and idle animations and stuff like that as well. So then you can have a bit more length and play around a little bit longer. So let's move on to actually implementing this animation in our game project. So first of all, we need to migrate it into the correct project, and once we did that, I'll see you guys there. So back in my game project, and I have the two curves in my project as well. So let's start by editing the character so we can actually make him play these animations. So we're going to add one more timeline, and we're going to use that timeline to play animations like fire, lower, all that kind of stuff. And we're going to keep these timelines for the looping animations in the background. So after the third timeline, I pretty much think we are done adding timelines, although I'm also still developing this project on the side, so I'm not sure what's coming. But for now, the third timeline should be the last. So let's call this the animation timeline, and just to make sure, I'm going to add an index, so 0, 1. Let's open it up, and we need to add two vector curves in here again, so a translation and a rotation one. So I'm going to name this my animation rotation, and then the first one should be the animation translation. And we don't really need to set any other settings in here, so I'm just going to compile, save and close this. And then we need two more variables to store these variables. So let's duplicate one of these. And this is going to be my animation translation. And we also have the animation rotation. And make sure we set them just like we did with the other timelines. Oh, I'm messing something up over here. So that should be over here. There we go. So on the update, we're gonna set the variables and make sure we split the rotator and the vector so we can connect them up. And now there's one other thing we're going to do in this timeline, and we're gonna grab these setters again and we're gonna plug them into the finished node, and we're gonna set them back to 0. And we can recombine this, that's fine. And now we also need to create one function. So let's create a new function and call this restart default tracks. And in here, we're going to simply start the idle and the walking timeline again. So go to the components over here, drag in your walk timeline and your idle timeline. And we're going to play them. So play and connect up both of them. And that's all we need to do in here. And then if we go back to the timeline we created on the finished pin, we want to add the restart default tracks. So we're going to plug it in over here. And then we should be good to go. So we don't need a custom event for this one. We're going to handle it by creating a function. And we're going to use that function to play the curve animations as well. So let's create a new function and we're going to call that play curve animation. Play curve animation, and we want to give this two inputs. So the first one is going to be the animation curve, and that's actually an array, and that's going to be vector curves. And the second input is going to be a boolean, and that's not an array, and that's going to be play reversed. So for the animation curves, when creating the animation, we have a rotation and a translation curve. So I make sure that when I store these in an array, I will always put the translation curve at the 0 index and the rotation curve at the 1 index. So that way I will always know where to retrieve which curve. And we're going to use that logic over here. So we're going to get the array index 0, and we're going to store that in a local variable, and that's our translation curve. There we go, translation curve. So that's a local variable. And for index 1, that's going to be our rotation curve. So promote that to a local variable as well. Make sure you assign index 1 over here. And promote to local variable rotation curve. So those are the two curves we need to play this animation. And then I'm also gonna promote the play reversed to a local variable just to keep things a little bit cleaner. So just promote it as well, local play reversed. And we have everything set up to go. So first of all, we want to stop our idle and our walking timeline. So grab the components for those and make sure we stop playing them and plug in both of them. And we want to set the values for those tracks to 0. So drag them in over here just by hand, get setters for them for the idle and the walking, both the rotation and the translation, and we want to set all of these to 0. Then we want to assign the curves to our timeline. So we're gonna drag in our animation timeline, and we only have one right now, so we don't really need to set up any logic for this. So we're just gonna hard code it, set curve vector, set vector curve. And the first one is going to be our translation. So we're gonna drag in our translation curve, the local variable. And the track name is going to be the animation translation. So if we open up the timeline in the event graph, so that's the name we assign to the curves over here. So the anim translation and the anim rotation, and we want to set these up over here. So anim translation, and then we want to do the same for the rotation. So make sure you grab the local variable rotation curve, and that's going to be rotation. And this should be a capital. Come on. There we go. So that should work. And then we need to make sure that the length of the timeline is set as well. So we want to set the length mode, timeline length mode, and we want to set it to the last keyframe so it matches the length of the curves we created. And now we simply want to play it. So we're going to drag in our local play reversed boolean and get a branch over here. So if we play it reversed, then we want to reverse from end. So we're gonna reverse from end. And otherwise we're gonna play from the start. So let's play from start. And then the last thing we want to do is get the length of the animation, so we can return that from this function. So let's get the timeline length, and let's get a return node in here. Oh, come on. So we can simply drag it onto the return node, and this is going to be our animation length. And this function should be good to go. Now we need to make sure that we set everything up in the animation blueprint as well before we can actually play animations. So let's continue in the animation blueprint. So in the animation graph, if you watched any of the previous videos for the idle or the walking, you probably already know what we're gonna do. We're simply gonna copy one of these transform modify bone nodes and plug them in. So make sure you do it after your ADS. So this will override anything. This is an replace existing, and the other ones are add to existing. So make sure that you add a new one after your ADS node, and this is set to add to existing for both rotation and translation. Make sure it's plugged in, and we need to get new variables for this. So promote to variable my animation translation. So let's make this my animation curve translation, and the animation curve rotation. So that's all we need to do in here, and then we need to create a function to update these variables. So I'm simply gonna duplicate one of these. Let's get the walking one. So update animation curves and put the index in there as well, just to be sure. So we don't want to get the walking translation. Let's get rid of these and the rotation as well. So from the character we want to get our animation translation, and that's going to be the target of the interp2, and we want to start at our current translation and store it in the current translation as well. And over here we're going to do the same. So get the animation rotation from the character. That's going to be target. And let's get the curve rotation as a setter and a getter. And plug them in. And that's all we need to do in here. So you might want to mess around a little bit with the interp speed. I think I'm going to bump it up a little bit. So you could kind of see this as an alpha, and if you keep this number too low, the animation won't, well, it will play, but it will look different. So all the curves will smooth out because of the slow interpolation, they won't actually reach the value you set in the curves. So keep it in mind, you can play around with these values in the interpolation. So this should be set up and good to go. Let's see, let's create a input setting over here for our switch weapon so we can test it. So we're going to set up a really basic event just to see if it's working. So we're going to call this switch weapon. And let's assign it to Q. Why not? Oh. There we go. Now in my first person character, I'm simply going to play the lower animation, and when it's done, I'm going to play the raise animation again. So I'm not actually going to change weapons because I only have a pistol in this project, and once we get up to the point where we have multiple weapons, we'll set up an actual weapon switching animation or function. But for now, just to see how it looks, so let's get the switch weapon event in the character. And then I'm gonna play the curve animation. So let's drag in the function that we created, hook it up. We want to play the lower animation, so we want to create a variable for that. And I'm gonna call that my lower animation. That's going to be a curve vector. And that's an array. Compile and save it. Yeah, that's fine. So for the default, we want to add two array indexes, and the first one is going to be our lower translation, and the second one is the lower rotation. So then we can plug this into the animation over here, and we don't want to play it reversed, so that's good. And then we can simply add a delay for the animation length that the function returns. And then we're gonna reverse the animation so it raises the weapon again. Play reversed. And that should be good to go. So let's see what happens. Get it in. And nothing really happens, obviously. So it wouldn't be one of my videos if something wasn't working. So let me check it out and I'll get back to you. Well, it wasn't too bad this time. So in the animation blueprint, we need to make sure that we call the animation curve update function. So the values actually get updated. And now the animation should play. So if I press Q, it lowers and raises the weapon again. So that's how we use the curve animation and the play curve animation function. So we're going to use that function later to play other animations as well. So we also have a little bit of setup done, and I finally showed a bit of the CurvePlayer. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching and talk to you later.